Amusement park employees of Reddit. What is your horror story? Story 1. This doesn't necessarily have to do with working in an amusement park, but it did happen in one. I worked in food and sometimes had to cover stations that weren't my home station. The one time I got put into a Dippin' Dots truck. Everything was fine for a while, but nobody was checking in on me. I had to pee so badly, but I was really busy and couldn't close down to go to the bathroom. Well, it got so bad that I ended up peeing myself. Of course, 30 seconds later, someone from security came in and asked how I was doing. I pretty much said that I peed and bolted, told my manager I was sick and clocked out and left. I was mortified. It gets worse though. Like 3 years later, I was on my senior trip for high school and a bunch of us were sitting around talking about jobs we'd had. This one guy, that was pretty mean, started talking about how he had to clean up pee in a Dippin' Dots truck because some ass hat peed himself. He said it was in the summer after 9th grade and he was pretty sure it was by the little kids section, which was where I was. I had never felt like I had such a weighted secret in my life before. Now I think it's funny, but I still have never told anyone that happened. Lol. Story 2. I once had to hide check a girl who was both mentally and physically disabled. This is just as they were about to get on the ride too, as someone else previously didn't bother to check her height to begin with. So I politely asked her and her carer to come and check her height after lots of no's. And as luck would have it, she wasn't tall enough, of course. She didn't take it well and started screaming, saying she was going to ride no matter what. After leaving to let the carer tell her to get out, she finally left her seat after about 10 minutes, which is an eternity on a roller coaster time. I see her walking off. I mean, yeah, it sucks, but I'm just doing my job. I'm just relieved that she's finally going, but then as she's walking through the exit, she turns around and screams, "I hope you die!" So, that was nice. It was hilarious, but still soul-crushing at the same time. Also, it was my birthday. I quit not long after. Story 3. One of my supervisors got fired for shooting up in the supplies closet, then taking a golf cart and accidentally running over a child. He was rehired after he went to rehab and then tried to sell drugs to the staff every day. Lol. Accidentally running over a child? Story 4. I was working in an amusement park as a 19-year-old and was on the turnstile talking with the guests and checking everyone off. At about 3 in the afternoon, a very young girl, about 6 or so, came up with her father, both in swimwear. Not unusual, since there's a water park attached to the regular park. However, there is a rule in the park that you have to be wearing a shirt to ride the ride, and the girl was in a two-piece suit. I informed both of them that the girl needed a shirt, and we would be happy to save their spot in line if she had a shirt she could run and grab. Her father raised his voice and loudly asked why I was looking at his little girl, and shouted about me being a p***. I backed off and told him he misunderstood, but he kept shouting back to the line behind him about how I was a sicko, and only stopped when park security arrived a few minutes later. One of the 2 times I felt like I was actually in danger, the dude was furious. Story 5. Worked at a large amusement park in the Tampa Bay area. 2 stories come to mind. The coaster I worked on had no floors and someone's change from the front row fell out of their pocket and hit the person in the back row near their eye. Coaster came back with a lady bawling and blood all over her face. The second was someone threw up all over our elevator in 100-degree heat, with no AC. I drew the short straw in cleaning that up. Story 6. I worked retail with a guy who'd worked summers at an amusement park in the Midwest. He'd been the rider-operator for a fairly small, tame roller coaster. The previous summer, a high school kid had gone on it with some friends and been unconscious when the ride stopped. My coworker called for the medics and performed CPR until they got there. The kid was dead on arrival at the hospital. My coworker said he still beat himself up about it sometimes. I told him not to. The incident had made the paper in my hometown because the kid who died was getting ready to go to my former high school. It was well known that most of his siblings had died young. He was something like the 5th of 6 or 4th of 5 to die before the age of 25, from a congenital heart defect. The last sibling didn't have it. The warning on the roller coaster about don't ride if you have a heart condition? Yeah, they mean it. The kid died and the guy I worked with had to live with the aftermath of it. The family tried to sue him in the park, but it didn't go anywhere once he told the lawyers the kid knew he had a heart defect and shouldn't have been on the ride in the first place. Story 7. I was at a firm in Williamsburg and we represented the Fan family. Timothy Fan was killed in 1999 after dropping out of the Shockwave ride at King's Dominion. He was really small for a 20-year-old, but hit the pavement like a 500-pound man. The photographs of his body were unbelievable. The family lost because King's Dominion somehow found witnesses who stated Fan was intentionally loosening his restraints to be able to raise his hands in the coaster. I don't know if anyone is familiar, but the Shockwave is a standing coaster. For someone to want to lift their hands is absurd. That there were actually witnesses who saw him do it is preposterous. Story 8. Working a high school night at a Midwestern amusement park. Some dude decides to climb the large structure in the middle of the park. It resembles a tower in France. He's beyond all protected barriers and watches an elevator go up and continue to climb. Since he at this point is already a genius, he forgets about the 6,000-pound counterweight that is careening down at him at 40 miles per hour. The dude is cut in half. In one half is pink jello. Yes, all hell breaks loose. Body covered in sheets that are billowing in the wind since they are 150 feet above the ground. Then of course operations continued normally. Story 9. I have two. The first one. There was a resident idiot that helped with maintenance before the park opened for the day. One of his jobs was piling the roller coaster track. This involved riding the coaster with this oil can thing and squirting oil in the track as it went around. For one part, you needed to be in the front car. For another, you had to be in the back seat. So normal process was to ride it once in the front car, then switch to the back car and ride it again. Instead, this dumbass decides to jump from the front car to the back car while he was at the top level of the ride. He missed, fell 3 stories and landed flat on his back. Unfortunately, he landed on 3 concrete stakes that were used as part of the tie-down structure. They pierced him in 3 different locations. He had to be pulled off them before they could take him to the hospital. Miraculously, none of them went through any of his internal organs, and none hit a major vein or artery. He ended up fully recovering. The second one. The amusement park was the place that did the fireworks show every year for the 4th of July. It was in a big public park with a lake. The fireworks were set off by some of the employees from an island in the middle of the lake. During the show, one of the guys accidentally kicked over a rack of launch tubes right as one of the mortars was firing. It lobbed right into the crowd and exploded in the middle of the crowd. There were several injuries and one little girl lost her hearing permanently. I was in the crowd on the other side of the lake and saw it hit. Really messed with the guy's head who kicked the rack over. He was the owner's grandson. Between that and several other things that happened that year, including the owner trying to cut the locks off the gates to the public park to open them, he forgot that he agreed to close the park for the weekend so that a scene from Born on the 4th of July could be shot in an amphitheater right across from the park. The park shut down for good at the end of that season. It was pretty sad. Story 10. I worked at an amusement park where one of our goals was to guest relate as much as possible. One day a kid told me hello after looking at my name tag. The name tag wasn't correct except for the first letter. I was having a pretty rough day and I replied half-heartedly without even really thinking, "Can you read, man?" His mother then told me the kid was blind in one eye. I meant to apologize but instead asked, "Oh, he is?" It was a girl. Story 11. I worked at a water park when I was in high school, not the sort of amusement park most people think of, but still an amusement park. The park had lots of large pools with a shallow section and a deep section, separated by rope. For some reason, parents thought that their kids splashing around in the shallow end qualified them to swim in the end pool. When you're a lifeguard, you're supposed to scan the pool every 30 seconds to check on everyone. 30 seconds is a long f***ing time. On more than one occasion, a kid would wander over into the deep end. It would be okay for a few seconds, but would panic and start drowning. Unlike what you see in the movies, someone drowning is a fast, silent affair. Splashing is the exception, not the rule. Usually it didn't take too long to spot someone drowning. The problem was that when a guard blew the whistle and jumped in the water, people would start flailing like chickens with their heads cut off. Unless the pool was nearly empty, this significantly slowed things down. And then there are the people that tried to help. Unless you're a qualified guard, stay out of the way. On more than one occasion, kids got pulled from the water pretty damn near death. Giving a kid CPR is not a pretty sight. One kid did die during the time I worked there. Thankfully, it was on a day off. Story 12. Not really a horror story, but it was scary to me. I worked at a children's amusement park and they had me operating the Ferris wheel, which is a rough ride to operate. You have to balance it and put people of similar weights in opposite cars, so it's a lot of stopping and loading before letting it go around a few times. As you can imagine, it's difficult for a teenager to explain to an overweight couple why they can't get on the ride when the only other person on the ride is a skinny kid. I was supposed to only be on the ride for 2 hours. They left me there for 4 hours in direct sunlight with no breaks. After 4 hours on a busy day with no water and no break, and getting sick of having fat people yell at me for not being able to get on immediately, I lost track of whether it was balanced. I wound up making it go backward and people freaked the f*** out. That's happened before, but I was usually able to stop it before it went all the way around. Not this time. I physically didn't have the strength. Luckily the owner was around and stopped it. People were pissed. When my supervisor came to see what happened, I said, "That's what happens when you leave someone on this ride for 4 hours. No idea how I didn't get fired. No one was hurt, but they sure as f*** were terrified." Story 13. Many moons ago, I was an assistant director of training security at a park known for its cartoon mice. While doing the walk around the park with a group of new hires, I got a call about a possible indecent exposure incident at Fantasyland. Knowing that was the most popular place for children in the park, so much more than Toontown, I rushed the new hires through the backstage area to cut travel time. While we were backstage behind the Small World ride, one of my trainees pointed out someone dropping their pants and leaning against the building. Before we had a chance to close the distance between us and the guy, a blast of brownish-yellow liquid exploded outwards in a fan pattern. I stopped the group, got on the radio, and informed them of the bio incident, then slowly made my way to the guy. When I was about 10 feet from him, he looked up, smiled, and blasted the wall again. Without a word, he pulled up his pants and started to walk away. His pants were soaked with liquid shit and piss. Before he was able to leave the area, Anaheim police apprehended him. After questioning him, they called for an ambulance. Upon talking with a police sergeant, found out he was a well-known homeless man in the neighboring city of Orange, usually picked up for swinging his dick at traffic. The kicker, though, was he wasn't the subject of the initial call. When we finally got to Fantasyland, we found out that someone was complaining about a woman breastfeeding. 3.5 years of working there, and that is one of the events that still feels fresh in my mind. Story 14. So, Six Flags has a lot of really dumb rules for their employees, which causes there to be a crazy high turnover rate. That, on top of the fact that this particular day happened to be the hottest day of the summer in New England, meant that after having only worked there for 2.5 weeks, I was the most senior person in my department of Kidsopolis. This means I have to run the whole operation schedule for my department and tell everybody where to go and what to do all day. Keep in mind, I don't even know half of these people's names. On top of that, nobody knows how to operate the freaking Zoom jets. So my supervisor grabs me first thing in the morning and tells me he was going to teach me how to operate this ride. Things are going alright when about halfway through this training, my supervisor passes out because it's like 110 degrees. So now I'm supposed to be leading this department full of people I do not know, while operating a ride I do not know how to operate, and if I have any questions, then I have no one to ask because my supervisor is unconscious somewhere. Meanwhile, I'm getting calls and someone's like, "Hey, so Sally passed out in the splish splash zone," and I'm just like, who the f is Sally? Julie is calling me and telling me she's feeling dehydrated and needs to go on break, and I'm like, listen, I've got Julio trying to operate the crazy cups and the wacky wagons at the same time. What makes you think we have enough staff to let you go on break? Fast forward to the end of the day. I've had 3 people faint because of the heat. I still don't know most of my coworkers' names, but I did get yelled at in Spanish over the phone a lot. And because I felt bad that nobody got enough time on break, I told everyone they could go home, and I'd sweep up the department on my own. I got pretty good at the Zoom jets, though. Story 15. I worked on the Dueling Dragons at Universal Orlando when in college. For those who don't know, the Dueling Dragons were 2 separate coasters that dueled and had several near misses with each other. They were pretty unique at the time and were super fun. As you can imagine, Universal told people to empty their pockets before they rode, so that their phones and wouldn't fly out and smack somebody on the other coaster at 60 miles per hour. Of course, many times people would ignore this because they're lazy and stupid. I was working one day when the ride shut down completely. A change had flown out of someone's pocket and hit a guy in the eye, leaving him blind in that eye. The tragic part, the guy was already blind in his other eye. Now the guy is 100% blind. They didn't duel anymore after that, and the ride was left permanently much lamer. I still feel for the poor blind guy, but the irony is comedic in a dark sort of way. Story 16. I operated a few different roller coasters during my fun-filled summers at this amusement park, but most of my horror stories come from one ride in particular. The train was one of the ones that you had to step into, with a lap bar restraint. On one particular day, it was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ride had been running as usual for most of the morning. As we were loading the train, a guest came up to me to say that there was an awful smell coming from the front car. My stomach immediately dropped. Usually with these types of complaints, we'd find that the previous rider had one too many slushies before riding and had lost their lunch. Gross, but we were used to cleaning that kind of stuff. I started approaching the front car and immediately called for my coworker to direct everyone out of the train and back into the line, and to call our supervisor to close the ride. Instead of a normal puke situation, I found a greenish-brown liquid spread throughout the front car, from the seat down to the floor. Whoever was the last person to ride the ride had shat all over themselves and hadn't bothered to tell anyone about it. Cleaning human feces is one thing. It's absolutely disgusting, but it can be done. But trying to clean up human diarrhea in 100+ degree weather, off the floor of a car where you had to kneel and stick your head into the car to reach the very front, is a situation that I never would have imagined even in my worst nightmares. The ride was down for the rest of the day, and it took over an hour to clean everything out of the car before we could start really sanitizing it. Story 17. Worked for an amusement park several summers as a teenager, the haunted house at one, off and on. Neither park I worked at was dry, so drunk parents ranked among the worst. The haunted house was particularly fun, as later groups tended to involve drunks. I took a bad kick to the ribs once while working under an overhang, and we had at least one violent incident a night. For further perspective, most of us were high schoolers and not all that intimidating. For the actual amusement park, the most fucked up thing was when I got sent home early once for a bit of weather coming, which wasn't that odd. Said I should have time to get home though. I lived a half hour away. What I didn't know was, I got sent home in a tornado warning. The warning was posted when they sent me home, they knew the line of storms was about to hit. I ended up pulling over after a tree branch hit my car and got stuck in a hailstorm. The roof of my car was dented. No tornado actually touched down, but we had bad straight line winds. A few other employees were also told to go home and had pretty similar stories of trying to. The woman working the office that day just decided, on her own, we'd be better off going home than staying in the fairly solid, permanent buildings in the premises, aka once we were gone, not her problem. Story 18. I was working security at a theme park when I was 18. One evening, one of the roller coasters that was stopped in the station got rear-ended by another. There were some injuries, but nothing severe, thankfully. I did, however, end up staying up all night after the park had closed, sitting on the coaster to ensure no looky-loos or news media tried to get access to the cars. It was dark, creepy. I was 18 in a closed, deserted amusement park. Oh, it's not like crazy hobos are going to get you in the middle of the night. The raccoons, on the other hand,